Book one was about the books that I've read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. One of his advocacy, the real story behind you should not have to kill to get ahead, and how we rebuild the American dream. And other than Mr. Christopher
Hi,
Rivers.
thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, Mr. Christopher. On Book One, One to Be. Can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Yeah, happy to. So, I am someone who was born and raised in Connecticut to a working class family, ended up enlisting in the Army, went and served in Operation Iraqi Freedom, went to undergraduate at West Point, studied physics and nuclear engineering. It wasn't until I was leading troops in Afghanistan that I realized I didn't know how government worked, not well enough to explain to my troops why we were still there 10 years later. So I went to
Mm.
Georgetown, got a couple master's degrees, one in public policy, the others in international relations, went to work at the State Department managing the science relationship for the United States between all the countries in North and South America, and then left that to go do consulting, and then got into state level politics when I moved back home to Connecticut and got a front row seat to what was happening politically in the United States in 2022 and 2024. And then following the 2024 election, wrote a book about that entire journey and why so many people are fed up with the system as it is.
So, Chris, the topic that we're talking about is related to the book itself, right?
That's right.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Mr. Chris, thank you. And our topic for today is why hardworking Americans still feel stuck. We have a paradox on our hands. Unemployment is low, jobs are available, yet a recent survey found that 40% of hourly workers say they are worse off than the national average. Why there's such a profound disconnect between the macro indicators and the lived experience of working Americans?
I think it really boils down to America is producing more wealth in any given year than any country in the history of the world, but that wealth is being shared with fewer and fewer and fewer people. And you can look at the metrics as you just called out and say, well, even if you're a poor person in America, you're still better off than most of the rest of the country, sorry, than the rest of the world. And while that's technically true, I think it also speaks to the fact that wealth isn't always objective number in a bank account. It is often relative. And what I put in my book is really the story of an economic system that has been moving $50 trillion worth of wealth from the bottom 50% to the top 1%. And what does that mean for the average working class person? Well, the average working class person in the United States is working more hours than ever before, producing more per hour than ever before, but being paid less than their parents' generation at the same time in their career. And at the same time, costs have gone up. The median price of a house has gone up, is now over $400,000. What my grandfather, when he was 30, paid for healthcare on an annual basis was about $600, $800. Now the average cost is over 15,000. The cost to earn a college degree from an in-state public higher ed institution has gone from a couple $1,000s to $100,000. And so when you add this all up, the dollar is not going as far as it used to, and workers are having to work more just to not fall behind. And I think that's a lot of what's behind this sort of resentment of people feeling like they're not getting ahead.
Mr. Chris, the term stack implies of lack of mobility. You've seen the data showing that the only half of children born in the 1980s earn more than their parents compared to 90% of those born in 1940. What does that statistic tells us about fundamental premise of the American dream?
So I think that fundamentally tells us that the American dream is lost right now. Not to say we can't get it back, and I'm hoping that we can get the conversation to that point, but if 50% of Americans, if less Americans are well off than their parents' generation, that is the opposite of the American dream. My grandfather worked in a factory, so his kids didn't have to. And my dad was a mechanic, so that I could have a chance to go to college. And the fact is, my brother and sister are worse off economically than my dad was. My grandfather was able to raise a family of six kids on a single income of a factory worker that didn't need a college degree. And now the stat you just pulled out is incredibly important. The other stat that's incredibly important for people to understand is the biggest indicator of how well off you will be economically speaking is simply one factor, and it's however well off your parents are. And that isn't so much a system where you can work and let your talents let you be whatever it is that you can possibly become, which is the American dream. It's really a system that's more of an economic caste system, and it's reinforced by how we fund education through property taxes. It's reinforced by a federal tax system. It's reinforced by corporate governance at the national level that keeps the money in so few hands.
Very well said, Mr. Chris. Very well said indeed. One economist recently wrote that the false belief that hard work is sufficient for economic success is the old as the nation. It's about of pain here is not just a financial but psychological, the sense that the old rules and the old promise has been broken.
I think that's exactly right. The what I was told as a kid is just put your head down and work hard and it will all pay off. And what I realized growing up in a town, in my hometown, Naugatuck, Connecticut, which I love dearly, in order for you to understand it, if you watch the last War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise, the scene where the aliens are coming down and supposed to be a bombed out version of Boston, that
Mhm.
was a factory in my hometown. It was a forgotten factory town and whatnot. It's just still the rhetoric was just work hard. And if you have what it takes, you will become something. And the reality is, in my hometown, for the time I grew up, the only people that I know of who really made it out and are at a better economic situation than their parents were are people who joined the military. And while I'm very proud of my military service, I don't think that you should have to join the military in order to get economically ahead. And why does that happen? Well, the military offers allowances for housing and the GI Bill to be able to buy houses that makes housing more accessible, which is the number one way that most middle class people accumulate wealth. The military also pays for a good chunk, if not all, of your higher education costs, which is definitely a proven ladder in the American system. Whereas the average person who's not in the military, if they're paying their own way through college, you're going to enter the workforce at least $100,000 in debt. So you're not starting with zero, you're actually starting with negative 100,000. And that's a hard hole to climb out of.
Negative indeed. The title of your book, You Should Not Have to Kill to Get Ahead, is intentionally jarring. It is a metaphor, but it's also visceral. What inspired this framing? What do you mean by kill in the context of wealth, power, and belonging?
Yeah, so it really is a triple entendre. I mean, it has three different meanings, and the book is in three different parts. The first part is my life story, and I went and fought on the front lines, and I have killed people, and I don't think that the veterans talk enough about our personal experience and how heavy of a burden that is for us. And I just wanted to share what I went through so that as our country is making other decisions about perhaps Venezuela or Greenland or all these other rhetoric that is happening right now, that we have a little more grounding in what the actual human toll is in a real personal way. So that's in part one. Part two is really pulling the curtain back on our economic system and our political system that empowers it, and how we use politics to keep people divided in America so we can keep this very unequal system moving forward while we're just making everyone more and more angry. And that leads to an economic system where deaths of despair are increasing. That means suicide, overdoses, and whatnot. And people are quite literally working themselves to death just to get by. And that shouldn't be the economic system that the most powerful, the richest country in the history of the world has as a default. And then the third part is of the book is what can we do about it? What are the real solutions we can implement to change direction? And part of the call to action for change is the amount of economic inequality that led to the French Revolution is less than what we have right now in the United States. The amount of wealth inequality that led to the Great Depression and World Wars is less than what we have right now in the United States. And when I first started writing this book, about 1 in 5 people in America thought that violence was justified to correct the political course of our country. And that was shared between people who are on the left and right side of politics. By the time I finished writing the book, it was 1 in 3. And so I'm not here to alarm people, but I do want to soberly say, if we don't find a fix to the economic inequality that we're facing now, history tells us, and it's not just the American history, you can see it in other countries, but history will tell us that violence will start becoming more normal, that something truly bad will happen. And what I'm trying to advocate for is, let's not go there. Let's just make better decisions now so that we don't have to kill to get our country ahead to a better place. And so those are the 3 different meetings, and it matches up with the 3 different parts of the book.
Very well said, Mr. Chris. Very well said. For many, the American dream has been sold as a race, a competition with winners and losers. How did we come to internalize and believe that someone else's success is a threat to our own? And what is the loss when we view the world through the zero sum lens?
So let me start from the latter part of the question and work my way backwards. The cost of having a zero sum lens is that you put immediately everyone into what I would call a scarcity mindset, which just means there isn't enough to go around, and you believe that. And part of our psychological makeup as human beings says, if I don't have enough to feed me, to meet my needs, or to meet my family needs, now I'm willing to go fight in order to have enough. And if you're taking more than what I think you're entitled to, now I want to go fight you in order to keep enough for myself. This is basic survival still instinct, survival skills. And it leads to a lot of very dangerous, divisive places because at the end of the day, what I've learned from all my journeys, Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, North and South America, human beings have far more in common that unites us and divides us. But as long as we focus on the division, then a lot of bad things happen. So that's the downside of this scarcity mindset. How did it get here? Well, basically, we made decisions as a country in the 1980s, and President Reagan was the champion of this to say, we want to have an economic system, according to him, that prioritizes shareholder value over everything else. It's called shareholder supremacy. And they instituted a whole bunch of laws that put that into action. They made things like stock buybacks for corporations legal. They were not legal before the 1980s. They made things like the healthcare insurance industry go from being nonprofit, which is what we had before the 80s, to being for profit after, which caused costs to go through the roof. We had a corporate and um, marginal tax brackets before the 80s that had this idea that corporations and wealthy people had to pay their fair share, and that was going to be more of a percentage of their income than average working class people. Now, what we have is a billionaire class are paying some of the lowest marginal tax rates of anyone in the country to the point where they're paying less in taxes than their own secretaries. And so, when you say there isn't enough to go around, it's sort of artificial. There is actually plenty to go around. And the number one stat I would point people to is corporate profits. Before the 1980s, we still had big companies, we had amazing companies, and they still were profitable. But from the 1980s till now, the profit margins have doubled of the largest companies in our country. And so on a given year, we pay as Americans about $4 to $5 trillion worth of taxes, which seems like a lot. We also pay another $4 trillion to just go to corporate profits. Of that, about 1 trillion goes to stock buybacks that aren't used as investments or just used to drive up the stock price even more. And so we're paying pre 1980s to now 2 trillion extra dollars a year just to corporate profits. And that all goes to the people who own stocks, which is by and large the people in the top 1 to 10% of the country. So there isn't to say that there isn't enough to go around. It's when I say that it's being shared with less and less people, those are the tools and mechanisms that allow that to happen. And it's just because we made those decisions in the 80s and we can unmake them.
So, Mr. Chris, you're not just talking about wealth, but also power and belonging. Can you unpack the triad and how are these three things, money, influence, and community, intertwined in the American psyche? And why do we so often feel we have to sacrifice one to get to another?
Absolutely. And I think I just unpacked the wealth side of this, the economics of it. So let's move right into power. And by power, I really mean political power. So if you're going to have an economic system that really benefits a very small number of Americans, then you have to ask yourself, why is that allowed to exist? Because the government role is to set rules and boundaries, and those rules benefit certain groups of people over others. And right now, the rules benefit the uber wealthy at the expense of the vast majority of the working class Americans. And that dynamic exists because of how much money plays a role in American politics, to the tune of about 97% of successful campaigns, i.e., the politicians who win their races, have more money than the other side. And we also have laws that we instituted, with whether it's Citizen United or others, that allow more unchecked money, unregulated money, dark money to enter the political system. And what people have to understand about political campaigns, they are basically marketing engines. And the more money you have to market compared to your opponent or compared to your competition, the more likely you are to be successful. And the more that we deregulated it, allowing foreign money, allowing large corporations and wealthy people to donate however much they want without having to disclose what they're donating to. We have seen the cost of every election hit a new record ever since that happened, to the point where now super PACs, which is the political organization that allows this dark money to influence politics, make up the majority of spending in our federal elections without knowing where it's coming from and how it's being spent. So that's how you create a political system that answers back to wealthy individuals and their interests, is that you have money play a huge role in the actual outcome of those elections. And then what does that leave us to fight over? And it's this idea of what it means to be an American. And we set up our politics to actually amplify the divisions rather than amplify what unites us. So in my book, I list out a bunch, pages upon pages of policy ideas at the national level in the United States where two-thirds or more Americans agree. And I think most people would be shocked at how much Americans agree on certain issues. And yet they never get enacted. They're policy ideas that are not currently enacted. And I personally believe that in this new age of campaigning, where you have politicians like Donald Trump who create an entire following that will follow him based on whatever he says, and then influencers regurgitate, and then they get the early adopters to follow on. By the time you get to sort of 15% of market penetration, where everyone's repeating the same thing over and over and over again, then the rest of the group kind of comes along for the ride. And then Trump himself, and he says it all the time, will say, a lot of people are saying it, so it must be true. And that is a new way of doing politics. Love it or hate it, but that's the sort of model that he's been using to convince millions of Americans that he's the right leader. And then he goes and campaigns on one thing and then does something else in office. But because he has this entire infrastructure set up where people can redefine what it means that he is actually doing, and they're helping build it along the way. So now they feel like they're not just part of the movement or following someone, they're actually leaders in the movement. And they haven't been able to lead in the political movement because they haven't had enough money up until now. And now they feel like they belong and they feel like they have meaning. And a whole group of Americans, working class Americans, support this style of campaigning because they don't feel like they belong anywhere else. But yet, that effort, that sense of belonging is being hijacked to just reinforce the same political powers and reinforce the even more crazy economic system that is making their lives harder. But that's how politics is helping create and amplify the division that already exists. And to be fair, the National Democratic Party in our country hasn't been able to keep up. They still want to have this traditional form of politics. And if people don't feel like they're in the tent, it's really hard to feel like you're in that tent with them. And they haven't been changing quickly enough to meet this moment with a different sense of belonging, what it means to be American. And that's where I feel like we have been let down by leaders on both sides. But that's how these three things interconnect with each other.
Interesting, Mr. Chris. You argue that the system is designed to make us feel we must complete ruthlessly. What are the specific pillars of the system, economic, corporate, cultural, all that most aggressively enforce the skill of be killed mentality?
I would say the top three parts of it are the shareholder supremacy that leads to corporate profits at all costs. And that has a trickle down effect within corporate culture that says, all right, you're supposed to work a 40-hour job, but if you're not really working 50 or 60 hours, people are going to look down at you. I don't know if I've ever had a job in my lifetime that I only ever worked 40 hours in. And when I talk to my millennial peers, most other people agree. The idea that you only work 40 hours is kind of a bygone, naive notion. The idea that you work through your lunch, the idea that you get to work from home, but you actually end up just living at work because you never get to unplug. All of that really trickles down from this idea of shareholder supremacy and profits at all costs. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar that we haven't talked about yet is the role of social media and our inability to actually regulate it. And that plays a role in this, in your question, because if I'm online and I see everyone else succeeding, well, Americans are hyper competitive. That's like the one thing that we truly lead the world in more than anything else. That's why our football championship is called the Super Bowl. That's why our baseball championship is called the World Series, even though it's not truly a World Series. And everyone just accepts that, right? So we love to compete. And if all you're consuming, and by the way, over 60% of Americans only get their news and information from social media platforms now, which are algorithms tool to keep you outraged, and what most people are clicking on is things that you want, like things that you don't have. And so envy is driving more and more the disconnectedness between what people are living and what they want to be living. And then the third part that goes along with that, because of people who own these social media platforms, it used to be the billionaire class or the uber wealthy class kind of stayed hidden a little bit. Sure, you can hear Warren Buffett every once in a while. Back in the day, you might hear about Bill Gates. Now you're hearing about some of these names a lot more with the Epstein files and everything else going on. But very recently, the idea that billionaire CEOs would go to the White House and make a huge spectacle of it, go to movie releases, making big spectacles out of it, being sort of celebrities in their own right, is a new development in our country, in our culture. And that goes right back to the sort of hyper competitiveness. And it's in their interest to say, well, we're here, we're this wealthy because we earned it and you haven't. And that's what gives us the power to be able to dictate how all this stuff works because we know better. And then you meet these folks, and I know some billionaires personally. There are some good people who have a lot of money. There's good people who made a lot of money the right way. And I'm very much a capitalist, but there's also billionaires who have completely rigged the system and are just constantly getting money off of it. If you look at Jeff Bezos' net worth when he bought the Washington Post, like over 10 years ago, it was like $20 billion, $30 billion. Now it's over $200 billion. And you have to wonder, like, what else did he grow? Like, where is the value that he was able to generate in 10 years to 10 times his net worth to something that is like more than most countries? And so those are the three pillars I would call out. It's the shareholder supremacy at leading to corporate culture. It's the online hyper competitive nature of Americans and how much time we're spending online comparing ourselves to each other. And then now having a billionaire class who's more than happy to throw out their incredibly luxurious lifestyle as something that we should all admire, but not be able to achieve.
Mr. Chris, there's a loneliness on the top that we don't often talk about. For those who have won by the current rules, who have wealth and power, what have they had to kill in themselves to get there, and what is the emotional or spiritual toll of that victory?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I really think part of the problem with getting so far ahead is that you get addicted to it. And you get addicted to the amount of money in your bank account. You get addicted to the amount of power and influence you can have. And at some point, you will never have enough. And when I talk to my wealthy friends, some of whom own a lot of real estate or yachts, they're constantly comparing their portfolio to everyone else. And then the flip side of that is, I really believe part of our needs as human beings is to belong to another group of human beings. And if the billionaire class, for the most part, not all of them, but if the ones that we're really talking about here are so addicted to their own net worth, so addicted to their own political capital, that they're constantly in competition and they constantly have to be worried about what everyone else wants from them. They're constantly being sued. They're constantly the subject of ridicule. They're constantly, uh, everyone they ever meet has something to pitch them. And I think that has to eat away at this sort of human experience of just belonging to a group without any expectations. And that's why I get really worried when this particular class of folks exercise so much political power in our country, because I don't think it's a normal human thing to be on the defensive where you think everyone else wants something from you. And you don't have to look too far about how this is affecting all of us. If you read President Trump's Art of the Deal, which I had to read in grad school, he put in his own book that your own friends are the ones that are always trying to, and pardon my language, screw you over, get your stuff. And if that's your idea of what your friends are going to do, then it kind of makes sense that you think the world is out to get you no matter what you're doing to deserve it or not. And so I think that's what you give up when you're really trying to achieve the highest of the highs. And because they have to give that up, and yet they have so much political power over the rest of us, that's why I think all of us should be concerned about it.
Very well said, Mr. Chris. Very well said. But before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my abstract essay is already in sixth season, abstract poetry in third season, and of course my book 101 review in sixth season too, comedy 101 in fourth season, and of course my food 101 in sixth season as well. Geography 101 love letters, movie 101 review, music 101 are in fifth season, science 101, sex 101 are in fourth season, and of course my baby podcast trivia 101, motivation 101, spiritual awakening 101, entrepreneurship 101, law 101, mental health 101, coaching 101, of course my bible verses 101 are my baby podcast. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So Mr. Chris, part of reimagining requires us to redefine wealth itself. If wealth is not just money in the bank, what is it? What does a genuine wealth look like in a life, a community, or a nation?
I would say on a personal level, wealth at the in a mathematical way, being a physics person, if you have more assets or resources than you actually need in your day to day, you're going to feel wealthy. You can have that by living a very Spartan lifestyle and not needing much, or you can have a more luxurious lifestyle needing more. But at the end of the day, individually, wealth is basically relative to what you actually need and what you think you need. The second part of this, I think, is a more spiritual side of, do you have meaning in your life? You can get meaning from believing in a higher authority. I'm an evangelical Christian. That's part of how I define meaning. You can also define meaning in the mission that you're on. You could define meaning in the people that you're helping around you. There's a lot of different ways to define meaning, but people, I've met some of the poorest people in the world in my travels, but they had meaning in their life. And boy, they acted like they lived a much more wealthier, well rounded life than the people who have a lot more money than them. And then the third thing I would say is, people who are wealthy in their actual income and sort of in their mentality end up passing it on to others. And that has this reciprocal effect that when you help others get ahead, whether it's with your time, with your advice, with some money and resources, whatnot, if you have enough to give something away, you will see it come back to you in some way, shape, or form. There is no better feeling than helping other people on the journey they're on in whatever way you can help them. So those, in my mind, are the top three things that come to mind when it comes to what does it mean to live a wealthy lifestyle.
It's priceless, people, if you help other people with the heart. We've seen experiments in different ways of living, cooperatives in intentional communities, stakeholder owned businesses. Are there are models out there, perhaps flying under the radar, that gives you hope and point toward different way?
I think there's two different models I want to call out. One is just looking at our own American history of the sort of economic system we had in the 80s and before that, from the 1940s to the 1980s, is a great place for us to go back to relearn the lessons. Another model to look at is the Nordic countries. They have different models of healthcare, different models of education. They
Yes.
have slightly higher taxes than us, but they also don't have medical debt. They don't have people going to bankruptcy because they can't afford to keep living. Like, there is definitely models in the Nordic countries that we can learn a whole lot from as we're looking to solve the problems we have here.
Totally agree with you, Mr. Chris. Finally, if you could paint a picture of America where you don't have to kill to get ahead, where wealth, power, and belonging are abundant and accessible, what does the American look like? How do people treat each other? How do they feel on Monday morning?
So first, let's talk about some specific stats. Uh, the median household income in the United States right now, we could do it. It's right now about $60,000. It should be about $90,000 if it would have kept up with productivity. Prices of everything you're spending money on at some point, it would take some time to get there, should be relatively 12 to 20% less expensive, while your income has gone up by about a third or so. That would dramatically change people's lives to be living not in a mindset of scarcity, but in a true mindset of abundance, which means we would have plenty to go around, and we could have time to actually only work 40 hours a week. And you can have time to not have to worry about your aging parents and whether or not you're going to be diagnosed with something. And you could wake up on Monday morning, yes, being excited to go to work, but also being excited to re-engage in bowling or family activities that like many of us have given up so we can work multiple jobs. You can re-engage with your church community or your faith community without having to worry if you have enough to donate and like how that might look. Like you can have enough to go around and not always be worried about being without by working less hours, producing about what you're producing now per hour, and having a purchasing power that most people couldn't believe we could achieve. And we would still have companies, they would still make profits, we would still have billionaires. And oh, by the way, we could take care of things like the national debt, which is hanging over all of our heads, which will make any future political decision way harder. We can do all of that if we just have a different set of values than we have right now, which is all based on shareholder supremacy.
Well said, very well said, Mr. Chris. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your book, your advocacy, or anything you want to promote on Book 101?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is You Shouldn't Have to Kill to Get Ahead, Reimagining Wealth, Power, and Belonging in America. All the various links to buy it are on chrisrivers.com. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble. In a couple weeks after this is airing, there will be an audiobook version. I recorded it last week. It will be coming out. So if you prefer that one, you can certainly wait or buy multiple versions. Also on chrisrivers.com, you will see Changemaker Academy, or Changemaker is the name of the website. And on there, what we're trying to do is teach people the ideas that are in the book in more detail. And the first phase of that is I launched my own YouTube channel. You can find links for it there. But we will be wanting to also expand that out into actual training so people can learn how our government works, learn how the economy works, and learn how to actually be part of the change and not just sitting back wishing it would be better.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Christopher Rivers, because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering books like this to rise. I like the audiobook on Mr. Chris because I'm so busy, so I will prefer the audiobook and looking forward for that. Because I like your book, I want to ask one more question. Is it possible to redefine success in a way that is both ambitious and humane? Can we still strive for excellence without sacrificing our souls or stepping on others?
We absolutely can. And the biggest proof point to say that we can is that we already have. We can learn from our own history and go back to what worked in a more inclusive way than what we had from the 40s to the 80s. So we absolutely can, and we should.
Yes, we should. I'm inviting you to please do come over on my abstract essay and let's talk about something good over there, and let's promote your book. Mr. Chris 100% support you to promote your legacy to the world. So, Mr. Chris, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation.
Likewise, more to come, people. See you soon.